For 10 long years, a dog named Max stood faithfully at Willowbrook Station, waiting for a man he loved. His eyes never wavered, his hope never died. But when time and fate took their toll, would Max's wait end in reunion or heartbreak? What happened to this remarkable bond that transcended time and loyalty? Max's story is one of unwavering devotion, love, and the power of hope. Can a dog's love truly last forever, even when the world moves on? Watch as Max's incredible journey unfolds, a tale that will make you believe in love that never fades. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind that makes the world feel fresh and full of promises. Leaves rustled around the feet of commuters hustling into the small, sleepy train station, their coats pulled tightly around them to ward off the early chill. Among the crowd, a man knelt beside a golden-furred dog, a retriever mix with bright, trusting eyes and a tail that wagged with unshakable devotion. The man's name was Thomas, and the dog was Max, a bond forged in years of side-by-side living, adventures in the woods, rainy afternoons curled up by the fireplace, and countless evenings where words weren't needed because their hearts already understood each other. This morning wasn't supposed to be different. Thomas gave Max a final scratch behind the ear, whispered something that only Max would ever hear, and stood up, adjusting the heavy bag slung over his shoulder. "Be good, Max. I'll be back before you know it." He smiled, but there was a tightness in his voice, a crack he couldn't quite hide. Max sat obediently by the platform, tail thumping against the worn concrete, watching as Thomas boarded the train. The door slid shut with a mechanical sigh, and as the train pulled away, Max remained in place, eyes glued to the tracks, certain that his best friend would be back soon. He had no way of knowing that Thomas wasn't going to another town for a business trip or a family visit. He was going to the hospital, and he wasn't coming back. The morning commuters grew used to the sight of Max sitting faithfully at the same spot day after day. At first, they thought it was sweet, endearing even. Some brought him scraps of food. Others knelt to pet him and murmur encouragement. "He's just waiting for his owner to come back," they'd say with a fond smile. "What a good boy." Time blurred into weeks, then months. Snow dusted the tracks, and still Max waited, his coat growing thicker against the cold. He would perk up every time a train screeched into the station, rising onto his paws, ears forward, tail giving a hopeful flick. Passengers would disembark, hurrying past him with briefcase in hand or arm in arm with loved ones, but none of them were Thomas. Each disappointment seemed to chip away at Max's spirit, but he never gave up, never moved far from his post, convinced that the next train might finally bring his friend home. When spring finally melted the last of the snow, and the trees along the tracks began to bloom again, Max remained. His once vibrant coat grew dull from the grime of the station, and his ribs began to show beneath thinning fur. A few station workers began to worry. "Maybe we should call animal control," one suggested, shifting awkwardly. But the thought of tearing him away from the only place he still found purpose seemed crueler than leaving him be. An old janitor named Harold took a special liking to Max. Every night after his shift ended, Harold would share his sandwich with the loyal dog and sit beside him for a while, telling stories about the good old days, about a wife long gone, about dreams that never quite came true. Sometimes, Harold would swear he saw Max nod, as if he understood every word. In a strange, unspoken way, the old man and the dog became each other's only family, linked by the weight of waiting for someone who would never return. Despite Harold's kindness, nothing could change Max's mind. His vigil was unwavering. His eyes, once so lively, now carried a solemnness far too deep for a creature that had once chased butterflies and rolled in fresh-cut grass without a care. Still he waited. Rain or shine, morning or night, he remained a silent sentinel, ears pricking up at every distant train whistle, tail wagging weakly every time he thought he caught a familiar scent. And every night, when it became clear that Thomas had not come back, Max would curl up by the platform, resting his head on the cold concrete, dreaming of better days, of days when Thomas would throw a ball across the yard and laugh as Max tumbled after it, of nights when they would sit together on the porch, the world fading away in the comfort of each other's presence. One evening, After a long day of trains arriving and departing without bringing the one face Max so desperately longed to see, Harold sat down beside him as usual. The old man sighed heavily, brushing some dirt from Max's fur with calloused fingers. "He's not coming back, boy," Harold whispered hoarsely, his throat tight with the words, "I don't think he can." But Max didn't move. He only leaned slightly into Harold's touch, eyes closed, as if soaking up every ounce of warmth he could find in this cold, confusing world. Even without understanding the words, Max understood the feeling behind them, the sadness, the finality. But even then, even knowing somewhere deep inside that his wait might never end, Max chose to stay. And so the seasons turned again, as they always do. Leaves fell, snow came, flowers bloomed and withered, trains arrived and left, lives moved on. But Max remained, his heart anchored not by logic or reason, but by something far greater, an unbreakable, infinite love. The first hints of autumn colored the town again, casting a golden hue over the trees lining the sleepy streets. Another year had passed, and still Max sat faithfully at the station, his silent vigil untouched by time or weather. By now, he was more than just a familiar face. He was a part of the town's identity. Children pointed him out with wide, wondering eyes. Tourists snapped pictures of a loyal dog, asking shopkeepers about the story of the dog at the station. And the locals? They spoke of him with a reverence usually reserved for saints, weaving his presence into the tapestry of their daily lives. Morning commuters would leave bits of their breakfast for Max, a half-eaten sandwich, a few strips of bacon, the last of a croissant. Someone left a worn blanket near his favorite spot by the bench, and one kind-hearted woman named Mrs. Langston, who owned the bakery across the street, began bringing him fresh water every morning before opening her shop. They all cared for Max in their own small ways, but no one tried to move him. It was as if they all understood that this station was sacred ground to him, a place thick with memories and hope he refused to abandon. Some days, when the sun was bright and the air smelled sweet with blossoms from the town square, Max would lift his head a little higher, ears pricking toward the sound of an approaching train. His body would tense with a fleeting burst of energy, and for a moment, it was as if the years had melted away. Passengers would disembark, bustling across the platform, and Max's eyes would scan every face, tail wagging in slow, hesitant sweeps. But each time, the truth settled again like a heavy stone in his chest. Thomas was not among them. Max would lie back down, resting his head on his paws with a soft whine that barely stirred the air, letting disappointment wash over him like a familiar tide. The town began organizing little efforts to make Max's life more comfortable. The station master, Mr. Duval, built a small wooden shelter just off the platform, painting it in cheerful colors and nailing a sign above it that simply read, "Max's Place." Local children filled the shelter with old pillows and stuffed animals, toys they no longer played with, but thought Max might find comfort in. It was their way of saying, "We see you. We love you. We're waiting with you." Even the mayor issued a statement urging townsfolk to care for Max as a cherished member of our community. But no matter how cozy they made him, Max's loyalty never wavered. He still positioned himself close to the edge of the platform, alert and ready each time a train pulled in. His body was slower now, a little stiffer with each passing season. His once sleek coat had dulled into a patchy, weathered mantle. His eyes, however, never lost that flicker of hope, that stubborn spark that refused to go out, no matter how many lonely sunsets he watched disappear behind the tracks. One particularly cold morning, frost coated the ground like a fine layer of sugar. A young woman named Caroline, new to the town, approached Max with a thick, woolen dog coat bundled in her arms. She had heard whispers of his story from her co-workers at the library and felt a tug at her heart stronger than anything she could ignore. Gently, she knelt beside Max, speaking in soft, soothing tones. He regarded her with a wary curiosity, but made no move to back away. Caroline slipped the coat over his shoulders, fastening the straps carefully, as if dressing royalty. Max sat still throughout, his body trembling not from fear, but from the cold he had grown used to enduring. "You're a good boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The best boy. Caroline returned often after that, sitting with Max during her lunch breaks, reading aloud from whatever book she had tucked in her bag. Sometimes poetry, sometimes old fairy tales. Max would rest his head against her knee, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the sound of her voice. She never tried to leash him, never coaxed him to leave. She simply kept him company, honoring the silent agreement he had made with the past. The townspeople admired Max's spirit, but for many, his presence also carried a quiet sadness. It was a reminder of promises broken, of waiting that could stretch on endlessly without the happy endings so many stories promised. It was a lesson in unconditional love, painful, beautiful, and pure. Parents would kneel beside their children at the platform and point toward Max, whispering lessons about loyalty and kindness into small, listening ears. Teenagers, usually so distracted by their own dramas, would fall silent when they passed Max, offering him a soft pat on the head as if acknowledging something sacred. As winter began its slow, inevitable creep into the town once more, the community's concern for Max deepened. The shelter was reinforced with extra layers of insulation. Mrs. Langston started bringing him hearty stews in place of simple water bowls. A vet, Dr. Patel, made quiet visits late at night, examining Max from a distance to make sure he was healthy enough to survive another cold season. Max tolerated it all with the quiet patience of one who had long since learned that life was about enduring. But no act of kindness could turn back the clock. The years wore down even the strongest souls, and Max was no exception. His movements grew more labored, his naps longer and deeper, his reactions to the train slowed, the bursts of hope less frequent. And yet he stayed. He stayed because he had made a promise, sealed in the simple trust between a man and his dog, that he would wait, no matter how long it took. One afternoon, as the sky bruised purple with the coming night, a train pulled into the station later than usual. Max lifted his head, ears flickering. A figure disembarked, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a coat much like Thomas's used to be. Max struggled to his feet, heart hammering against his ribs with a painful, joyous urgency. His tail gave a weak, hopeful wag. He took a few trembling steps forward, but as the figure drew closer, Max's tail faltered. It wasn't Thomas. It was a stranger, who passed him by with only a fleeting glance, absorbed in his own world. Max sank back down with a heavy sigh, curling into a ball as the cold seeped into his bones. Above him, the stars blinked into existence one by one, silent witnesses to his endless vigil. The station lights flickered on, casting long, lonely shadows across the platform, and Max, ever faithful, closed his eyes and dreamed once more of the day when the trains would finally bring his best friend home. The years rolled onward like slow, heavy waves, and the town continued to change around Max. But Max remained steadfast, rooted in a memory that refused to dim. Buildings were repainted, new stores opened and closed, familiar faces moved away, and fresh young families arrived to take their place. Children who had once fed Max scraps of their sandwiches were now teenagers, racing to catch the morning train, their eyes filled with dreams and futures. Yet there he was, still lying faithfully at the platform's edge, weathered by time but unbroken in spirit. Max had become something almost mythical, a living symbol of loyalty, but even the strongest spirits could not hold back the toll that relentless waiting exacted. The signs of Max's decline were subtle at first. He moved slower, each rise to his feet an effort that left him stiff and trembling. His golden coat, once gleaming under the sunlight, had turned pale and matted, with patches where fur no longer grew. His ribs pressed sharply against his thinning skin, no matter how many warm meals Mrs. Langston left for him at dawn. His eyes, once so sharp and alert, grew cloudier with the creeping fog of age, but they never lost that glimmer of hope whenever a train pulled into the station. No matter how battered his body became, the heart inside it remained loyal, and that loyalty kept him anchored to the platform, to the dream that one day Thomas would come home. Caroline noticed the changes first. She had never missed a day without visiting Max, carrying with her books filled with comforting words and poetry, reading to him as he rested his aging head on her lap. One afternoon, after closing her novel, She leaned down to press her forehead against Max's. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "You don't have to wait forever, sweet boy. You've already proven how much you love him." But Max only closed his eyes and let out a soft, weary sigh, as if to say that leaving simply wasn't an option. His promise was bigger than his own comfort. It was a sacred duty he had chosen, and he would see it through, even if it cost him everything. The townspeople, too, began to rally even closer around Max. They organized a schedule to make sure he was never alone for too long. Someone would always be there, a baker dropping off warm bread, a schoolteacher sitting beside him with a thermos of broth, teenagers who stayed after school just to scratch behind his ears and tell him about their days. They brought him blankets stitched with love, new coats when the old ones wore out, and beds filled with the softest stuffing they could find. Yet even with all their care, Max's decline was something they couldn't stop, and it broke their hearts anew each time they saw him struggle to stand or watched him lift his head weakly toward yet another train filled with strangers. Winter came again, harsher and more merciless than the town had seen in years. Ice clung to the platform like glass, and the wind sliced through the station like a knife. Max, bundled in layers of donated coats and nestled within a reinforced shelter, shivered beneath the weight of his years. Dr. Patel came by more frequently now, checking Max's frail body with gentle hands, heart heavy with unspoken truths. After one examination, he sat down heavily beside Caroline and Harold, who had come to know each other well through their shared love for Max. "He doesn't have much time left," Dr. Patel said softly, his voice nearly stolen by the cold wind. "His heart's still strong, but his body, it's just worn out." Harold nodded grimly, his weathered face set in stone. Caroline wiped at her eyes, her heart shattering a little more with every word. They all knew that Max deserved to pass surrounded by love, not alone on the cold concrete. Yet none of them dared move him, afraid it would break his spirit completely. They understood what outsiders never could. Max wasn't just waiting for someone. He was holding on to a promise, a hope, and to take that away from him would be to erase everything he had lived for. In the evenings, Max's dreams grew more restless. He would twitch and whimper in his sleep, paws paddling against invisible ground, chasing after memories that faded the moment he awoke. Caroline sometimes swore she saw him smile in his dreams, a soft, contented curl of his lips as if, somewhere deep inside, he was running alongside Thomas again, their bond untouched by time or pain. During the day, though, he grew quieter. He spent long hours simply staring at the tracks, breathing in the scent of iron and dust, waiting. One bitterly cold afternoon, Caroline found Max struggling to lift himself up as a train approached. She rushed to his side, helping him gently, her hands cradling his weakening frame. Max leaned heavily into her, trembling from exertion, his eyes locked on the crowd spilling onto the platform. As always, he searched every face. As always, disappointment settled like a stone in his chest when he found no familiar one. Tears blurred Caroline's vision as she pressed a kiss to his forehead, whispering, "It's okay, sweet boy. It's okay." Word of Max's failing health spread beyond the town. Stories appeared in local newspapers, then on blogs and news sites across the country. "The dog who waits," they called him, and hearts broke all over the world for the golden dog, who refused to give up. Letters poured into the mayor's office. Blankets, food, and donations flooded the town. But no matter how much the world loved Max from afar, only one person could heal the wound that festered quietly in his loyal heart. And still Max waited. One night, as snowflakes the size of feathers drifted down in lazy spirals, Harold, Caroline, and Dr. Patel sat beside Max, wrapped in blankets and silence. They watched the trains come and go, watched Max lift his tired head at each arrival, watched the disappointment darken his cloudy eyes again and again. It was unbearable, watching hope hurt him over and over. But they stayed, because they owed him that much. They owed him their presence, their comfort, for as long as he needed them. At some point, as the station lights flickered weakly against the darkness, Max rested his head on Harold's worn boot and let out a sigh that sounded almost like a goodbye. Caroline cradled his head gently, tears streaking down her face. Dr. Patel placed a trembling hand on Max's side, feeling the slow, fragile thud of his heartbeat. He was still fighting. He was still holding on, still waiting, because somewhere deep inside him, Max believed, against all odds, against all logic, that Thomas would come back. And that belief, pure and unbreakable, was what kept him alive, even as everything else faded away. The winter deepened into a bitter, relentless freeze, wrapping the town in a silence so heavy it felt almost sacred. Snow piled up around the station, mounds of soft white untouched except for the small, circular trail Max had worn into the ground, a path from his shelter to the platform's edge, and back again. Day after day, he made that slow, deliberate journey, even as his body faltered and his breath grew ragged in the cold air. The townspeople watched, helpless, their hearts aching with every step he took. They had long accepted that they could not change Max's path. They could only honor it. Caroline had taken a leave from her job at the library to be with Max full-time. She spent every day wrapped in thick coats and scarves, sitting beside him on the frozen platform, reading in a soft, soothing voice. Sometimes she didn't read at all, just sat there, her hand resting lightly on Max's back, offering her silent companionship. Harold, Mrs. Langston, Dr. Patel, and others took shifts too, making sure Max was never alone, not even for a single heartbeat. They shared thermoses of hot tea, stories of Max's younger days, and sometimes just tears when words were too small for the emotions that swelled inside them. Each passing train became harder for Max to greet. The arrival of the screeching metal beasts once made him leap with youthful hope, but now he only managed a slow lifting of his head, his cloudy eyes straining against time and exhaustion. He still looked, still searched every crowd, his body betraying him, but his heart stubbornly holding on. It was hope, pure and simple, that foolish, beautiful hope that had defined his entire existence, and that hope refused to die, even as Max's strength ebbed away like the receding tide. One evening, the sky turned a deep violet, the stars sharp and brilliant against the darkness. The town had decorated the square for Christmas, strings of lights twinkling in the snow, wreaths hanging from every lamppost. Music floated from the church at the top of the hill, carols sung by warm voices inside warm rooms. But at the station, a sacred hush settled over the gathering crowd. News had spread. Max was failing, and the town came to say goodbye. They gathered in a circle around him, bundled in layers, breath misting in the cold. Caroline knelt at Max's side, her gloved hand stroking his frail body with infinite tenderness. Mrs. Langston set down a plate of warm stew nearby, though Max no longer had the strength to eat. Harold stood at his usual post by the ticket booth, his cap clutched tightly in trembling hands. Dr. Patel checked Max one last time, pressing his stethoscope against the dog's thin chest, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He's close," Dr. Patel said quietly, his voice cracking with the weight of grief. "It won't be long now." The crowd murmured prayers and whispered words of love into the cold night. Some cried openly, others simply bowed their heads, their silence a deeper tribute than any words could offer. Children placed small offerings beside Max, drawings of him, little Christmas ornaments shaped like bones, hand-sewn blankets. They understood, in their innocent hearts, the sacredness of what was happening. They understood that Max was not just a dog. He was a symbol of something pure and rare, a love that refused to give up, no matter how much the world changed around it. The distant whistle of a train pierced the night air, a mournful sound that seemed almost part of the gathering itself. Max stirred weakly at the sound, his tail giving the faintest thump against the frozen ground. His head lifted a few inches, and his eyes, cloudy though they were, locked onto the approaching lights. He tried to rise, his body trembling with the effort, but he collapsed back onto the blanket with a soft whimper. Caroline cradled his head gently in her lap, tears streaming freely down her face. "It's okay, Max," she whispered, voice breaking. "You can rest now. You did more than anyone could ever ask. You waited. You kept your promise." The train screeched into the station, slowing to a halt. Passengers spilled onto the platform, laughing and chattering, their voices muffled by scarves and the hush of falling snow. Max watched them, his breathing shallow but steady. He searched because he had to. He searched because it was all he knew, all he had promised to do. And then, as if some invisible hand had brushed against him, Max's body relaxed completely. His tail gave one final, slow wag, a small, weary declaration of love and hope, and he closed his eyes for the last time. The crowd stood frozen, breath caught in their throats, as the life left Max's body with a sigh as soft as the falling snow. Caroline pressed her face into his fur, sobbing quietly. Harold knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder, his own tears sliding down weathered cheeks. Mrs. Langston covered her mouth with her hands, her body shaking with grief. Dr. Patel bowed his head, whispering a blessing only Max could hear. The station lights flickered once, then glowed steadily, casting a golden halo around Max's still form. Snow fell in soft, gentle waves, covering the platform like a blanket. And in that moment, the entire town seemed to hold its breath, the world pausing to honor the faithful heart that had given everything for love. The mayor, who had rushed from a council meeting the moment he heard the news, stood at the edge of the gathering, hat in hand. He looked out over the crowd, his people, who had loved Max so fiercely, and then he looked down at Max, lying peacefully in the snow. He cleared his throat, voice thick with emotion. "This dog," he said, voice carrying through the still night, "taught us all what it means to be loyal, what it means to hope, what it means to love without conditions." He waited for someone he loved every day, in every kind of weather, for years, and he never gave up. A chorus of muffled sobs answered him. "We will not forget him," the mayor continued. "We will honor him, not just with a statue or a plaque, but by trying to be more like him, in our loyalty, in our kindness, in our hearts." The crowd murmured agreement, and somewhere deep in the hearts of all who stood there, something shifted. They would never again walk through life, taking love for granted. They would never again ignore a chance to be kind, to be loyal, to be present for those they cared about. As the final train of the night pulled away from the station, leaving behind only the hush of snow and the glow of the lights, Caroline wrapped Max's body gently in a blanket stitched by the children. She cradled him as if he were still breathing, still warm, still waiting for the friend who never came. But they all knew, somehow, deep down, that wherever Thomas was, he would have known, he would have felt it. The love of a dog so pure, so steadfast, could not be contained by the boundaries of time or distance. Max's spirit would find him. Of that, they were certain. And so, under the endless sky filled with stars and snow, the town said goodbye to their beloved Max, the dog who waited. And in their hearts, he waited still, a bright, unwavering light against the darkness of the world. Spring eventually broke through the long, sorrowful winter, breathing life back into the frozen town. Snow melted into rushing streams along the sidewalks, buds unfurled on the trees, and golden sunlight returned to warm the station platform where Max had spent the last decade of his life. But even as the world around them bloomed with new beginnings, the town of Willowbrook carried a hollow ache in their collective heart. Something was missing. Every morning, as the trains rumbled into the station, the platform seemed too still, too silent, without the soft thump of a tail or the eager lift of a tired head searching the crowds. Max was gone, and the station, their lives, were forever changed. Yet, in the midst of their grief, something extraordinary began to grow. It started with Caroline, who had spent more time by Max's side than anyone else. One evening, seated at the long oak table in the town hall, she quietly cleared her throat and spoke. Her voice trembled, but her words rang with purpose. "We should build something," she said. "Something permanent. Something that says, he was here, that he mattered, that love like his doesn't just disappear when a heart stops beating." The mayor, Harold, Mrs. Langston, Dr. Patel, and dozens of townspeople nodded solemnly. They agreed without hesitation. Max had given them his loyalty, his heart, his very life. The least they could do was make sure he would never be forgotten. Plans were set into motion almost immediately, each person eager to contribute in their own way. Fundraisers sprung up, bake sales, auctions, a benefit concert at the school gymnasium, and the entire town poured their energy and love into making the memorial a reality. The sculpture was to be placed at the heart of the station, near the very spot where Max had spent so many days and nights waiting for Thomas. Caroline worked with a local artist, Mr. Whitaker, an elderly man whose hands were gnarled with age, but still capable of breathtaking beauty. He visited the station daily, sketching from memory, consulting old photographs, and sitting quietly where Max had lain to soak in the spirit of the place. He wanted to capture not just what Max looked like, but what he meant. As weeks turned into months, excitement built alongside sorrow. Children were brought to watch the progress, learning the story of the dog whose love had outlasted seasons, whose hope had transcended time. Even those who had moved away returned for visits, bringing their families, telling their children, "This is where Max waited. This is where he loved." Letters and donations continued to arrive from strangers who had read about Max in the newspapers or seen his story shared online, moved to tears by the unwavering loyalty of a dog they had never met. Finally, on a soft golden morning, the memorial was ready. The entire town gathered at the station, the air electric with anticipation and the sting of fresh tears. Folding chairs were lined up in neat rows. White banners fluttered from lampposts. Bouquets of daisies and wildflowers surrounded the base of the covered statue. The mayor stood at a simple wooden podium, clearing his throat as he surveyed the sea of faces, everyone touched, changed by Max's story. "My friends," he began, voice rich with emotion, "today we honor a life that taught us all more than words could ever express. Max showed us the power of devotion. He showed us that love doesn't weaken with time, it strengthens. That waiting, even in the face of loss and uncertainty, is not weakness. It's the deepest act of courage." Caroline stepped forward next, holding a small box close to her chest. Inside was Max's worn collar, the nameplate still gleaming softly. She placed it carefully at the foot of the statue, a sacred offering to a soul who had given everything without ever asking for anything in return. Her voice broke as she spoke. Max wasn't just waiting for Thomas. He was teaching all of us how to live, with hope, with love, and with a heart that never gave up. At the mayor's signal, two children stepped forward, their small hands tugging at the white sheet covering the memorial. The fabric slid away with a whisper, revealing the sculpture beneath, and a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. There, cast in bronze so lifelike it almost seemed he would blink and wag his tail, sat Max. He was positioned exactly as he had been so many times before, front paws stretched out, head lifted just slightly, eyes fixed on the horizon where the trains arrived. His expression captured perfectly that impossible mix of hope, patience, and unbreakable love. Around his neck was a sculpted version of his collar, the name Max proudly visible. Beneath him, carved into the stone base, were words that brought fresh tears to every eye. "Faithful until the end, forever in our hearts." Silence fell, profound and reverent. Even the birds seemed to hush their songs. The sun glinted off Max's bronze fur, making him glow like a guardian of the station. Some people wept openly. Others simply stood with heads bowed, hearts too full for words. It was perfect. It was everything Max deserved and more. In the weeks that followed, the memorial became a place of pilgrimage. Travelers who had never heard of Willowbrook before made special trips just to sit by the statue, to run their fingers over Max's worn bronze ears, to leave flowers or letters or photos of their own beloved pets. People who had given up on hope found it again, sitting beside Max. People who had forgotten the depth of loyalty remembered. Love flowed through that station like a river, all because of one dog who refused to give up. Caroline continued to visit daily, sitting beside the statue with her books, reading aloud to the breeze. Harold would often stop by after his shifts, tipping his cap in a silent greeting. Mrs. Langston left a fresh bowl of water every morning, as if Max might still wander back, thirsty from another long watch. Dr. Patel came with his grandchildren, telling them the story of the bravest patient he had ever known. And somewhere, perhaps beyond sight, but never beyond reach, Max's spirit lingered, watching, waiting, loving, as he always had. The trains kept coming. Faces changed. Seasons shifted. Life went on. But in Willowbrook, At a little train station where the snow once fell thick and heavy, a faithful heart was remembered. A statue gleamed in the sunlight, a silent testament to love that endures. And whenever a train rolled in and the crowd stepped onto the platform, some swore they could still feel it. A soft, warm presence brushing against their legs, a wag of the tail in the wind. Max was home. He always had been,